Good evening, I'm Peter Hasland. Welcome to Global Dialogue, a program dedicated to an exploration of global ideas and global activity from the perspective of local Santa Barbara residents. My guest tonight is Dr. David Krieger. He's the president of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, an activist group based in Santa Barbara with international and global tentacles. Their mission is fairly simple: rid the world of nuclear weapons and bring peace. So welcome, David. And how did you get into this business? What was the source of inspiration for you to be a founder of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation?
I actually had a couple of sources of inspiration. Perhaps the first and most important one was visiting Japan in 1963 and going to Hiroshima and Nagasaki and realizing that they had a very different perspective on the atomic bombings of those two cities.
Well, the perspective I would assume to be different, but tell me, how do you think, what was surprising about their perspective difference?
Well, as an American and as a school child, in my education, I'd always learned we dropped the bombs and won the war, and it was a great technological achievement, and without much emphasis at all on the harm that was done. The difference was, I felt that the American education was from a perspective above the bomb, and the Japanese perspective was beneath the bomb, where all the horror, the death and suffering took place, and it gave me a very different perspective on atomic weapons.
But isn't this always the case? I mean, warfare is not designed to be particularly unmessy, and how did that experience with Hiroshima and Nagasaki differ from, say, the firebombing in Tokyo or Dresden or any number of other areas?
Well, in some ways, it didn't differ. I mean, lots of people were killed in the firebombing of Japanese cities. I believe something like 67 cities had been firebombed and pretty much destroyed before Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I think the difference was that we had a new technology that one bomb could destroy one city, and by implication, many bombs could destroy countries and eventually civilization and possibly the human species. So it's a difference in a qualitative difference, I think, in the number of people who are at risk and threatened by nuclear weapons, and that the number of people that are threatened and at risk today, despite the fact that the Cold War has ended, is everybody. It's 7 billion people on this planet. And so it's concerning to me that there's so little, so few people seem to be concerned about nuclear weapons remaining in our midst and continuing to be a threat to humans and others on the planet.
Play devil's advocate here. I mean, we haven't had a nuclear detonation in anger since 1945. What leads you to the conclusion that we might do it again?
As long as those weapons are available, there's always the possibility that it could happen again. The difference today from then is that when it was done in 1945, we were the only country, the United States was the only country with nuclear weapons. Today there's 9 nuclear-armed countries, and it's very unlikely that one country could use nuclear weapons without some form of retaliation that could trigger off all 9 countries engaging in nuclear warfare.
Yeah, but
and nuclear warfare is an oxymoron, I think, because it's not much of a war the way we understand war. It's just massive destruction.
Yeah, but as you suggested, most people don't really think much about the possibility or feasibility of a nuclear exchange.
That's right, and that's a problem. Most people don't think about it. Most people don't think it's a problem. Today, a lot of people are concerned about climate change and climate chaos. That's a good thing. It's good for people to understand where there are risks, and particularly risks of survival to the human species. And nuclear weapons, because of their power and because of their numbers, there's still more than 16,000 of them in the world, many of which remain on hair trigger alert, continue to be an existential threat to the human species and other forms of life.
Given that we're not the adversary of the Soviet Union anymore, although we do little things with Mr. Putin and stuff, but there's no real sense that they're going to launch a preemptive strike against us, nor us. So why is it that we have these systems on hair trigger alert, as you point out?
That's a great question. In any rational system, in any rational country, there would have been negotiations, or there would have been reciprocal actions that would have taken those weapons off hair trigger alert. I mean, it's appalling that more than 20 years after the end of the Cold War, these some 2,000 nuclear weapons between the US and Russia remain on high alert, hair trigger alert. It's bizarre. It's inexplicable. But
and your explanation is what?
My explanation is it's kind of inertia. I mean, there's no good reason for it. They could be taken off alert. It doesn't. I think the policymakers are living in olden times, almost dinosaur-like times, thinking that for deterrence these weapons have to be on hair trigger alert. Well, we should talk about the subject of nuclear deterrence. It's an important subject, and there's no guarantees that because you threaten retaliation with nuclear weapons that somebody else will be inhibited from actually using them, or that they might not be used by accident or miscalculation.
Well, let's be specific. Deterrence was a concept used in the Cold War, and the Soviet Union and the United States both adopted this as basic policy, where these weapon systems were in existence in order not to be used, but to deter the other side from using them. So what's wrong with that analysis?
It's an analysis. It's actually a hypothesis. You can't prove that it's true that we haven't had a nuclear war because of nuclear deterrence, because you can't prove a negative.
Right.
So we go on the assumption that if we threaten somebody else with nuclear weapons, they won't use them against us. That's a dangerous assumption because it requires rationality on all sides. And the way I look at it, all leaders are not rational at all times. And so there's a risk in the system. It's a hypothesis. It's not even a theory. It's just a belief about how human behavior may play out. And with nuclear weapons, it's a very dangerous system. And I would say it's a little bit like playing nuclear roulette. Nuclear roulette, putting a nuclear weapon in a big gun and pointing it at humanity's head, spinning the barrel and seeing what happens.
Okay, so we have all of these nuclear weapons and nobody to shoot them at. I mean, I do this, I say this facetiously, but it appears as if we don't have any longer any need to keep them around.
I think that's true, but let's remember there are 9 nuclear-armed countries, and let's take India and Pakistan, 2 countries in South Asia that have had several wars over the territory in Kashmir over the years. Both are nuclear-armed now. Both are proliferators. They weren't original nuclear weapon states, so they both have nuclear weapons. And you know, who's to say what might trigger another war between India and Pakistan that could lead to a nuclear exchange? And atmospheric scientists did an interesting study not too long ago in which they looked at what would happen if India and Pakistan each used 50 Hiroshima-sized nuclear weapons on the other side's cities. And what they found was it would put enough soot into the upper stratosphere to block warming sunlight, to shorten growing seasons, to cause sufficient crop failures to put 2 billion marginal people at risk of nuclear famine. That is, 2 billion people could die as a result of what we would call quite a small nuclear war, given the fact that it would use 100 Hiroshima-sized weapons out of a global stockpile of 16,000 nuclear weapons.
So why? Why do we have an ongoing fascination with these weapons if, I mean, I accept what you're saying, that these are very dangerous weapons to have and that inadvertence or accidental launching might generate the kind of consequence that you're describing. So what prevents us from negotiating a settlement that would first reduce the enormous cost of these weapon systems?
Yes.
They're not cheap.
Not at all. We're planning to spend $1 trillion, just the United States, $1 trillion over the next 3 decades on upgrading our nuclear arsenal.
$1 trillion.
$1 trillion.
That's more than I get for producing this show. I mean, never mind. But so why do we do this?
That's a great question. Why do we do this? The original 5 nuclear weapons states were the United States, then Soviet Union, been replaced by Russia, China, Britain, and France. And they were the victors in World War II. I think they came out of World War II with a sense of, almost a sense of ownership of the world, certainly a sense of power in the world, and having the nuclear weapons reinforce that sense of power. I think that's one reason. There's the reason of power and the reason of prestige that goes along with nuclear weapons. I think other countries, different countries have different reasons, but I think power and prestige are the most important reasons.
And that
it's like for India and Pakistan, they're playing in the big leagues now that they have nuclear weapons, in their view.
So if that's the case, then there's very little reason why current nuclear powers would surrender their weapon systems.
It takes some leadership. The United States, if it showed a little foresight, would give that leadership to the world. Would try, actually, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty should be called the Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Treaty because it has an important clause in it about nuclear disarmament. And that clause, Article 6 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, has not been fulfilled. It requires the parties to the treaty to negotiate in good faith for a cessation of the nuclear arms race, an end to the nuclear arms race, and for nuclear disarmament. So that treaty entered into force in 1970, and the 5 original nuclear weapon states, US, Soviet Union / Russia, UK, France, and China, are parties to that treaty, but they haven't fulfilled their obligations for those good faith negotiations yet. And that needs to happen. The United States is threatened by nuclear weapons more than it's protected by them. So wise leadership in the United States would be saying, yes, we're going to convene the countries of the world, and particularly the countries with nuclear weapons, and we're going to negotiate in good faith to end the nuclear arms race and for nuclear disarmament, total nuclear disarmament. And unfortunately, that hasn't happened. The United States hasn't shown that leadership, and neither has any other country.
Is it possible to show the kind of leadership that you're suggesting ought to happen in a political system that is as divided as the American political system?
That's a good question. I don't know. It seems to be it isn't. When Barack Obama came into the presidency, very shortly thereafter, he gave a speech in Prague, and he said that America seeks the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons. That sounded very good. He got a lot of applause for that line. And then almost immediately after that, he said, "But I'm not naive. You can't expect that to happen within my lifetime." And he was a relatively young man, so his lifetime should be, last many decades. I just think the longer we continue with the status quo with nuclear weapons, the more countries are going to become disaffected with nuclear haves and nuclear have-nots. There'll be a greater potential for proliferation to other countries so that nuclear weapons will spread, proliferate, and with each iteration of nuclear weapons spreading, I think the world becomes more dangerous and more uncertain.
Does the UN have any influence on the outcome of this debate?
Well, we'll see. We'll see if the UN does. The Non-Proliferation Treaty is pretty clear about what it requires, and maybe I should mention to you a project of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, which has to do with legal action toward achieving nuclear disarmament. On April 24th of this year, the small but powerful country of the Marshall Islands, a country of 70,000 people, brought lawsuits against the nine nuclear-armed countries in the International Court of Justice, which is the highest court in the world, and separately a similar legal action against the United States and U.S. Federal District Court. So the Marshall Islands is a country that was a trust territory of the United States after World War II. And as a trust territory, the United States as trustee decided to test nuclear weapons there. So over a period of 12 years, from 1946 to 1958, the United States tested 67 nuclear weapons on the territory of the Marshall Islands, and it was an equivalent explosive power of 1.6 Hiroshima bombs being detonated every day for 12 years. Okay, so the Marshall Islands know what happens when an atomic bomb is, in essence, dropped on them. And they've decided to sue the 9 nuclear weapon states for their breach of their obligation under the Non-Proliferation Treaty and under customary international law for those good faith negotiations that were promised.
So who launched the lawsuit? Was it the Marshall Islands?
It's Marshall Islands. It's a David versus Goliath lawsuit by the Marshall Islands. The Nuclear Age Peace Foundation is a consultant to the Marshall Islands. We're trying to help them organize the suits, bring together lawyers that will act in a pro bono on behalf of the Marshall Islands, and try and get the word out so that there's advocacy around what the Marshall Islands are doing in the International Court of Justice and in U.S. federal court.
It seems like you're hanging your hat, so to speak, on this Article 6 of the treaty that says the parties shall show good faith, which is kind of a slippery.
Negotiating good faith.
Yeah, but isn't that a little slippery as a legal term?
No, good faith is pretty well established. When when you say you're going to do something in a treaty or in a contract, if you act contrary to what you say you're going to do, that's bad faith. And so Marshall Islands are just saying, look, this treaty entered into force in 1970. Now it's 2014. A lot of time has gone by. Where's your good faith? You know, show us that you're serious about doing what you promised to do 44 years ago.
It'd be sort of easy to say, well, we were willing, but it's them. They didn't want us.
Yeah, and that's what's said all the time. Don't blame us, blame them.
Right.
But the Marshall Islands are asking that they say it in a court of law. Let the judge hear it. Let the judge decide. Let the court determine whether the obligations are being met by any of the parties to the treaty, or for the countries that are not parties to the treaty, by customary international law.
Switching topic just a little bit. Do you see anything changing in the global environment that gives you more hope that your position is going to prevail than just a few years ago?
You know, I think the climate change movement provides some hope, because a lot of people have mobilized around climate change, and I hope the likelihood is that that will result in some better outcome than we appear to be headed for at the present. But I think I'm not sure I see anything completely manifest yet, but I know this, that there isn't a single global problem that can be solved by any one country, no matter how powerful that country is. And consequently, countries are going to have to wake up, and if they're going to solve global problems, of which there are no shortage, and particularly the global problems that are existential, survival problems in nature, the world is going to have to cooperate. The world's going to have to come together and cooperate if we're going to save each other. The only way we can save ourselves, in other words, is by saving each other. And I don't know, I mean, this is the challenge of the nuclear age. You know, our foundation is called the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation. What that really means, from our perspective, is that peace is an imperative of the nuclear age. Peace is an imperative. We've got to cooperate. We can't be making wars on one another. We can't be trying to go it alone. We've got to be working together if we want to get past these tremendous global problems. And the nuclear age represents a point in time in which our technologies have become strong enough, powerful enough to do us in. And in an age where technology can defeat us, human values are going to have to prevail if we're going to prevail. And I see the time that we're in as a struggle. Maybe this has always been the case, but most important now, I see a struggle between wisdom on the one hand and hubris on the other hand, and the untethered reliance on deadly technology is a form of extreme hubris, I would say, and wisdom would suggest that we come together, solve our global problems, stop wasting trillions of dollars on arms and on weapons and military forces and military action, and start using our resources, our human resources, our intellectual resources, our financial resources, to solve the world's problems, to work together, to build a better world, to solve inequities, to end human rights abuses, to assure that everyone gets adequate food and water and health care on the planet.
But this advocacy that you are putting forward is is not new. I mean, this distinction between.
It's not new, but it's more pressing than ever.
But that's the point I was trying to get at. What is it that has changed, if anything, in our global system? You suggest, well, perhaps it's climate change that is prompting us now to look at global reality in a different way. I think it's even more than that. I think we're now seeing, we're seeking to redefine what we mean by security. You know, how do we feel secure? The bomb used to make us feel sort of secure, right? At least some of us.
It shouldn't have,
but it did.
Perhaps
but
it did.
did. And now that warfare is much more limited, much more individual. I mean, an individual with a bomb comes in and blows up a building. I mean, our sense of security is fundamentally challenged, and it seems to me that that may usher in a different way of thinking about how we achieve collectively or individually security for ourselves. Our own nation is not capable of feeling secure so long as other nations also feel secure.
That's right. We're either going to be secure together, all of us, or we're all going to be insecure. And I think you're right. I mean, I think we do need a new way of looking at security. And a term has been around for a while of human security. I mean, I think human security is a much better way to look at security than military security. Human security is the security for the individual human being, to assure that that person has the resources that are necessary to be secure. But security is also a psychological issue. I mean, I don't think ultimately there is any true physical security other than having basic needs met. And the psychological security that might be provided by nuclear weapons is really a form of insecurity. We need to rethink security, and we need to rethink warfare. Yeah. I'm really surprised, as someone who was involved at the time of the Vietnam War, that we've learned so many wrong lessons from that war, which the United States lost, and that those lessons, the lessons that could have led us to more security, simply did not.
David Krieger of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, thank you, and thank you for joining us. Good night.
Thank you, Peter.